This is Little Bows, and it's a 12-inch finished block. Here is the picture, and here's the diagram. There are just two sizes of squares that we're going to cut. And we're going to use the stitch and flip or the folded corner clipper to do the little bows. I call them bows. The A patch is the background fabric. It's the larger patch. We cut those 3.5 inches, and we'll need 4 patches for each of the background squares. Patch B is a 2-inch finished square that we cut 2.5 inches. And we'll need 2 of each of the darker fabrics that make the little bows. And I'll need to correct this on your copy. If you have the AccuQuilt 6-inch cube shape 1, we'll cut patch A, and the 8-inch cube shape 2 will cut patch B. To make this block, we're going to use the stitch and flip method or folded corner method to put this triangle in one corner of 2 of the larger squares. And this is what it looks like, the patch A and patch B. I'm going to briefly demonstrate the stitch and flip method and the folded corner clipper method to do those. If you're not familiar with these methods, you can scan these codes and it will take you to a full tutorial on each method. And here's what it looks like with 4 blocks. I have chosen 4 different light backgrounds and 4 different darker fabrics are the bows. You'll take 1 set of your background squares. You have 4 in each set. Take 2 of them out and match them with a darker fabric. And we're going to lay these on right sides together like this. And we want the angles to go this way. I'll just do these together. We want the angles to go this way, so we're going to cut off this corner and it will look like this once we sew it. For the stitch and flip method, you draw a diagonal line across this small square, and then you're going to stitch just to the right side of this line. And we'll do that in just a minute. For the folded corner clipper method, we want the angle to go this way, so we'll turn it like this. And you put your ruler down. This is a 2.5-inch square, so you match the 2.5-inch line. And then there's a little line that comes up this way. You match that and the edge of the square and then the top. And you cut. What you're doing here is you're cutting off this corner before you stitch it. In this method, you're stitching before you cut off the corner. You're using the line as your stitching guide, and you're going to stitch just to the right side of this line. And you'll see that this has a little area here, which includes the seam allowance. Now stitch both of those. Now both methods have been stitched, and we'll press these seams open, and it will look like this for the folded corner clipper. For the stitch and flip, you'll trim off 1/4 inch, same as you did here, and then you'll press these open as well. And here are the 2 pieces. We'll put these together for 1/4 of the block, the 12-inch block. This would be a 6-inch finished block, and then we'll put those together with the other 3 to make our 12-inch finished block. So I'll go ahead and do the rest of the piecing and show you the 4 blocks, or the 4 units. This is how the individual 4 patches go together. You piece these. You always have these triangles pointing to each other. So you piece these together like this. Then you sew these together and you have these units. You just position them how you like, and you sew the 4 patches together. Here is the completed block, and I love this block for so many reasons. First of all, its simplicity. It's so simple in construction and in design, just the little bows. You could use anything for the background. You can use 1 fabric for the background and all your scrappy 2.5-inch squares. You can use just scrap it up totally and use scraps in every area of the background and the bows. Just keep your lights light and your darks dark so you'll have your pattern. One of the things I really like about this block is you never have points to cut off. The only time that your points will look cut off is in this area here. There's white in the very tip of that, so it looks like the point is maybe cut off, but all these other points are nice and they're not cut off at all. And the only place you have to match seams are in these areas here. And I can just see this in baby quilts, quilts of valor, a lot of different things. It's just a really neat block and it's fun to do. You don't need any special tools either. If you just have a number 2 pencil, you can do this block. Stay tuned, and I'm going to show you how to use the quilting app to size this quilt and figure out how many pieces of fabric you need to make the quilt in the size you want. Before we start, I'd like to show you what's on my design wall. The number is 0302 half square block, and that's the sampler setting number 3. And it's this half square triangle sort of block, and you set all of your sampler blocks in it. And I haven't pieced it together yet. It's just laid out in blocks, in rows and everything. So I just wanted to share that with you. If you're interested in it, it's 0302 half square block. We just finished looking at Little Bow's block, and the only 2 patches in the block are 3.5 inches and 2.5 inches. Since this is such a simple block, I wanted to go through both of the quilt calculators on the quilting apps. The first one is sizing a quilt. We put in the width and the height of the finished width and the height of our block. Our block is 12 inches wide and 12 inches high. Let's just, for example, let's say this is a good block to make a baby quilt. If we put 4 blocks across and 4 blocks down, we'll have a little square quilt for the baby. The next thing you can put in is sashing and borders, but we're going to leave those out right now. I've got my 4 blocks across and my 4 blocks down, and I come down to this little button, calculate, and press that. It gives me the quilt width is 48 inches and the quilt length is 48 inches. And I'm going to go with that because this is a good example here. And we have the number of blocks is 16. So we're going to write that down. It's set 4 by 4, 4 blocks across and 4 blocks down, and that's right here that we wrote in here. It's 12-inch block, and that's finished. That gives us a 48 by 48 inch quilt, and we need 16 blocks. And I always write down the information. So there's the information. 4 by 4 blocks, 12 inches, 48 by 48, 16 blocks. That's the information you need just to finish your quilt, so you don't have to keep coming back. Now we're going to scroll down to how much fabric do I need? And there's just some important notes, and it tells you you're using 42 inches of fabric. The results you get is the exact amount of fabric you need to cut, so you need to keep in mind that you probably should add more fabric. Okay, now this one, this little program I had somebody write for me, so it's more elegant than the one I did. For this calculator to find out how much fabric you need, we're going to use the cut size of the patch that we need, or the patches that we need. In this example, we're cutting squares, so it doesn't matter which is the lengthwise grain and which is the crosswise grain. So let's put in what we need for patch A, which is 3.5 inches. So we'll put 3.5 for the lengthwise grain and 3.5 for the crosswise grain. Now let's see how many we need for this quilt. If you look on your sheet for patch A, it says on here you need 4 patches for each of the background fabrics. What we're going to do is calculate how much fabric we need for the entire quilt. We're not going to worry about how many, color A or color B. We're going to calculate the number of patches we need for the entire quilt, and then the amount of fabric we need, and we'll break down our fabrics after that. So if we need 16, you need 4 patches for each of the 4 fabrics. So that's 16 of patch A per block. I'm going to write that down now. So 16 per block. And that's patch A. So 16 per block, patch A. Now we need to get our little trusty calculator out on our phone. And we know we have 16 blocks, and we know we need 16 patch A per block. So we multiply 16 times 16, and that gives us 254. And we'll write that down. 254 of patch A. Now let's put the 254 into the number needed, 254, and then your results come up instantly at the bottom. And this says you need 22 strips at 3.5 inches times the width of fabric. So I'm going to write that down. 22 at 3.5 times WOF, width of fabric. Wrote that down at the bottom. Okay? And that's a total of 254 pieces. Then this tells you the fabric needed. 77 inches, or approximately 2.14 yards. And I would round that up to 2 1/4, even maybe 2.5 yards for, this is the background fabric. So that's not unreasonable for a 48 by 48 quilt. That's mostly background. So before we move on to patch B, I want to talk about what do you do with this information. If I was going to use the same fabric in all of the background, this is how much fabric I need of that one fabric. And I would cut the 22 strips times 3.5 inches times the width of fabric, then subcut each strip into 12 segments. I would have all the 254 background patches I needed for the 48 by 48 quilt. But you probably don't want to use the same one, or maybe you do. What if you had 10 different fabrics you wanted to use in the background? Then you could divide this 22 by 10, so that's roughly 2 strips per fabric. So 2 strips times 10 fabrics is 20, and you would have to get another strip out of 2 more fabrics. So 2 fabrics would have 3 strips, and the other 8 fabrics would have 2 strips cut from it. And that would be good for a scrappy kind of background. You cut up all your squares and then just distribute them over the quilt. If you have 5 different fabrics, then that's the same thing. You divide this 22 strips by 5, and whatever results you get, that's how many pieces you would cut. So let's do 22 strips divided by 5 fabrics, and that gives us 4.4. For each fabric, cut 4 strips, and then you'll need an extra 2 strips from some of the fabrics or from another fabric. And that's what you can do with this information. If you want to make it totally scrappy, you know you need 254 of these 3.5 inch squares. So you can just cut from your scraps, your light scraps for the background, and just keep counting down as you cut them, count them down, and when you reach 0, you start at 254. If you cut 10, you subtract that gives you 244. If you cut 40, you subtract that, and that gives you 204. And as you cut your squares, you subtract them from this total here. And when you get to 0, all your squares are cut. That's what you can do with this. If you have fat quarters and you have 20 fat quarters, then you can cut 12 of these 3.5 inch squares from a fat quarter. That's what you can use with this information here. Now let's look at patch B. So if we write this down, if we have in patch B, we look here, and this isn't corrected yet, but it has, you want 2 of each of 4 fabrics, so 2 times 4 is 8. So you'll need 8 patch B per block. And patch B, so we'll multiply 16 blocks times 8 gives us 128. I'm going to put that in here right now, 128, and I'm going to write it down. Patch B is 128 pieces. Now patch B is 2.5 by 2.5, so I'm going to change that to 2.5 and 2.5, and then it instantly calculates. So this tells you you need 8 strips at 2.5 inches times width of fabric. 8 at 2.5 times width of fabric. So, oops, upside down. Here is that. All this right here. 8 per block, patch B, 128 pieces. You need 8 strips at 2.5 inches times the width of fabric. And again, the same thing you can do with this information. If you want to just pull 8 different fabrics, you just cut a strip from each one, and from each of those strips you'll cut 16 segments and you'll have enough of your bee patches. The same thing, or if you have 4 fabrics, then you'll cut 2 strips from each of the 4 fabrics. So that's a little bit what you can do with this information. Thank you for watching.